Excuse me. Have you received any types of awards or honors?
I have.
Can you tell us about that?
Sure. A number of teaching awards at the University of Utah. I also received a career development award from the National Institutes of Health.
Your Honor, at this time, defense moves to admit was what has been marked as defense exhibit number 1, which is Dr. Munson's curriculum vitae for purposes of this hearing, Your Honor, and we did provide Mr. McCarthy a copy of that.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor. I mean, well, there is an objection. I beg your pardon. About the admission of the evidence, the CV, no objection. I beg your pardon. I would like to pursue some lines of questioning, of course.
No, I understand. Just as to the CV. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
It's admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Munson, have you ever testified as an expert witness before?
I have.
And what states?
About half of the United States.
Okay. That would include Texas, right?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever testified in any courts in El Paso County, Texas?
Just in a preliminary hearing connected with this case a few months ago.
Okay. And what other cities in Texas have you testified with respect to your field of expertise?
So yeah, I can quickly pull up my record. I know one was Palestine, Texas. I also testified in Austin. I think just those two, actually, and I believe they were both post-conviction hearings.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Munson, but you testified in one of those post-conviction hearings. Was it the Robinson case?
Robertson. Yeah,
Robertson?
Robert Robertson.
Okay. Dr. Munson, what is biomechanics?
Yeah, sorry, I was jumping the gun a little bit earlier, but
That's okay.
biomechanics is the application of mechanics. So as I mentioned earlier, mechanics is a focus area of mechanical engineering. It's the study of how objects respond to the application of force. So a super important area of study for engineers as we design products, whether that be an automobile or an airplane or a robot. But biomechanics is specifically the use of mechanics in understanding how biological tissues and systems respond to the application of force. So someone who's trained in biomechanics then understands how to utilize the principles of mechanics, understands the properties of human tissues, for example, when the principles are applied to the human body. So yeah, just like, well, I should say, a typical inanimate object, a piece of metal, for example, when there's a force applied to it, it will move, as described by Newton's law, and its shape may also change. In fact, its shape will change, if maybe only just by a small amount, but there's a shape change. So those same things happen to the human body. And if we want to think about the head, if there's a force applied to the head, then the head will move and its shape will also change. So those same principles apply.
And so one of the easiest examples that I can think of and that you've mentioned before would be, for example, in car accidents, correct?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. And just briefly, can you explain how biomechanics is used in that?
Yes. So, of course, engineers are involved in almost every aspect of automotive design. But some engineers are particularly concerned with safety in that context. And so when we start talking about safety, obviously there's interest in understanding the forces that are likely to result in injury. So biomechanical engineers use their expertise to evaluate vehicles that have been designed to determine whether or not they should be considered safe, whether they meet government standards of safety, as well as to design those vehicles.
Okay. Dr. Munson, are the underlying scientific theories behind biomechanics valid? And I'm just kind of looking for a yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. And specifically when analyzing how severe a fall is or was, what are the biomechanical considerations or methods generally involved?
Yeah. So many of the principles are exactly the same as an engineer might use, for example, if they were trying to figure out how a cell phone might respond to being dropped, right? So when an object is dropped, whether it falls, whether it's a person or a phone, there are a couple of considerations that need to be made. So, for example, first of all, it's really important to understand what the velocity is of the object before it hits the ground. That determining what the velocity could have been in a given scenario is a simple application of conservation of energy, no matter whether, again, it's a head or a phone or whatever it may be. The next step in determining what the force could have been in a given event would be to use impulse momentum, which is a form of Newton's law. In this calculation, you can imagine the object moving toward, say, the ground, an immovable constraint, and it has some momentum associated with a mass times a velocity. When it hits the ground, clearly there's a force that acts that brings the momentum of that object to rest. And the time that it takes for that object to come to rest is an important factor in determining what the force is that's required to stop that momentum. So in the case of a phone, in that scenario, you would need to know the impact response of the phone. In the case of a head, you need to know the impact response of the head. So,
okay.
Do you want me to explain any? Okay, go ahead.
So, in analyzing how severe a fall is, a biomechanical consideration or method used involves basically a two-step process, right? First, you have to calculate velocity, which you mentioned, and
Right.
then you apply this impulse momentum. Is that fair to say?
That's right.
Okay. Now, this technique or method, it involves mathematical equations and physics. Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay. And are those both accepted principles in your field, the math and the physics behind this type of calculation?
Yes, they are. And in fact, I'm teaching a class right now where all sophomore mechanical engineering students learn to utilize those principles.
Okay. And are these scientific theories and methods behind the biomechanics involved in falls generally accepted as valid by the engineering scientific community?
Yes.
Is there anything documented, such as literature, videos, supporting or rejecting these types of theories or methods that are used for these calculations?
Sure. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that to make that impact or impulse momentum calculation, that second step, we need to have information about how the human head responds to the application of force. So there have been studies where cadaver heads have been dropped and the force over time associated with that drop has been measured. So those characteristics have been defined. There have also been a number of experiments that have been conducted using crash test dummies, for example, that also help us quantify the forces that could be associated with a short fall in the same way that they can quantify the forces that are associated with, say, an automobile accident.
And so if other engineers wanted to test or evaluate or replicate these methodologies, would you say that they would be able to do so?
Yes.
How long have you been teaching these types of theories and methods again?
Well, I worked as a teaching assistant during my education. My PhD was completed in 2001. Then I didn't really teach for a while. I was just doing research until 2008, but then I started teaching those principles again.
Doctor, have the results of such studies involving these types of calculations been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals?
They have.
Okay. What materials do you remember reviewing in this particular case?
I reviewed some medical records, also some legal documents like affidavit describing, I guess, summarizing a lot of the key elements of the case, but reviewed some medical records. I'm not a physician, to be clear. I'm an engineer. I don't have any medical training. But medical records are useful for me to be able to see the injuries that physicians have diagnosed. So I'm not trained in diagnosis, so I utilize the conclusions of the physicians to determine what the injuries were. It's also helpful for me to know the age of the child and the weight of the child. Those are important parts of the calculations that can be made. I also reviewed police records associated with investigations of the scene or interviews that have been conducted or had been conducted, for example, with the defendant, with others who may have been related to the case in one way or another.
Were you also able to look at photographs?
Yes.
Okay. And were you able to tie the pertinent facts of this case to the scientific principles we just discussed?
Yes.
Okay. And in this case, did you properly apply the same theories that we discussed and methods? I'm sorry, strike that. In this case, did you properly apply the theories and methods that we discussed?
Yes.
Based on what you discovered, Doctor, would it be helpful to a jury? Would your testimony be helpful to a jury in deciding this case?
I believe so.
Your Honor, may I have a minute?
Sure.
I'm just gonna chat via Teams with my co-counsel just to see if there's anything else.
This is the court reporter. I have a question for Mr. Avila. Could you tell me in what regard you are appearing today?
Good afternoon. I apologize for being late. The Zoom hearing kicked me out. My name is Josh Avila. I'm also an attorney that represents Mr. Abdi Rodriguez.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I'm gonna go ahead and pass this witness.
All right, Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Munson, want to start by talking a little bit about your CV and then we'll go into some of the more technical stuff. And I guess besides not being as swift as my opposing counsel, I actually never read your transcript of your previous testimony or such. So be as simple as you can for my sake, or I may just have to re-ask the questions. But getting to your CV on this, let's see. Can you explain? I think I'm just okay. Here, I think an ad hoc reviewer. This would be on page 3 of 36 journals. This obviously means that you would occasionally be one of the peer review academicians on a paper. Is that how that works?
Yeah. So when somebody like myself, for example, submits a paper to a journal and essentially requests that it be published in that journal, then the journal basically seeks out experts in the areas related to the work that's being reported and asks them to review the papers. So yeah, those are the 36 journals that I have worked with through the years. I've reviewed for a number of them many times. Typically, I do this 10 to 15 times per year.
And then okay, I guess, well, and then grant review, is that sort of evaluating grant applications or grant proposals that are coming in from individual engineers or so forth?
Yes. So though I wouldn't say engineers necessarily, I have been asked to participate in panels to review grant proposals for the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation. National Science Foundation, those are typically all coming from engineers for the panels that I've worked with, but the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Veterans Affairs, those proposals sometimes involve engineers, but more often they're submitted by physicians and other medical scientists.
Thank you. And then page 4, you have publications, presentations, and grants. So manuscripts, those obviously would, well, I guess obviously those are in fact publications.
That's
And
right.
having been published in the mentioned journals, right?
Probably, yes, probably all of them. I have probably reviewed for all of the journals that I have published articles in.
Oh, no, I was talking about the ones that where you're a co-author, it looks like, in many of these. There's quite a number where you've worked with others, and it looks like, yeah, and they've appeared in various technical or academic journals.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so those, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, please, sorry.
No, I was just going to confirm that those are papers that I have participated in. When I'm listed as the final author, that means that I directed the research. The first author is typically a student that I'm training.
Okay. So, okay, I see what you're saying. When you're the last, you might be considered the lead author on that?
Well, the language that's used is that you're the senior author. And the first author is the person who had primary responsibility for the writing of the paper and often the conduct of the experiments, if there were experiments.
All right. So, and you are senior author on quite a few.
In most of the papers in that list have come out of my laboratory, and so I've directed those studies. But there are some where they've been collaborative works, and so you basically put all of the everyone involved from different labs together. And in some cases, I'm not the senior author on those papers.
Can I just stop
And-
y'all? Let me just stop you. I've just printed a copy of his CV. Let me just get it so I can follow along as you're questioning. Is that okay? Sure.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
No, just give me 1 minute. All right, I have it. Please proceed, Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Mr. Muggs, I guess, okay, so as to the manuscripts, I haven't actually counted them all up, but it looks like it's at least 30, 30, I guess we would call academic articles in which you've been involved in one capacity or another. It is what it looks like. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's about right.
Okay. So now of these, I mean, you cover a lot of matters. It appears based on the titles of these. So I want to go through a few of them and then to confirm what they're about, and then if I've made mistakes or overlooked something, you can let me know. I noticed that there is, I guess on page 6, there is a one which I guess actually it's two authors, so uh, it's toward the bottom, page 6, on the state of head injury biomechanics, past, present, and future.
Yes.
It actually says part 2. Okay. Very good. And then I saw one where I guess it looks like you're the principal author. This is on page 5, 2019, cerebral blood vessel damage and traumatic brain injury
Yes.
in clinical biomechanics. Um, and okay, so when it comes to the manuscripts, okay, I mean those two stood out with respect to this these proceedings, I guess. But you know, are there other articles here that really are on the on the on on the topic of what you were talking about in the trial, which, as I understand, is the theory that that the baby was dropped or fell from a certain height, and you know, a certain impact and a certain G-force and so forth. Are there other articles amongst these manuscripts that deal with those issues?
There is, I would say, one that is addresses those kinds of topics specifically. It would be on page 6, about 5 or 6 articles from the bottom where the first author is Barnes.
Yes, sir.
Traumatic spinal cord injury, accidental versus non-accidental injury that appeared in seminars in pediatric neurology. So that is the one paper that is probably, you know, that uses all of the uses many of the topics that we've talked about, or that I would talk about in this, you know, as I guess being most important to this case. But my research lab, specifically, the research that I direct, is all motivated by traumatic brain injury. So the focus is not necessarily on predicting whether or not a given event would result in an injury. The focus is to do basic science that can help contribute to answers to those questions. So my lab focuses actually on the mechanics of the cerebral blood vessels, or the blood vessels from the brain. So you'll see that most of the papers, as you read through them, have that as their focus. But because, well, in order for me to convince somebody that they should give me money to study this topic, it's clearly important that I can also demonstrate that I have expertise in the broader questions related to traumatic brain injury. So that then becomes very useful to helping me contribute to cases like this.
Okay. Now, I beg your pardon for maybe asking you to repeat because I think you were sort of kind of concisely summarizing what the main objective or focus was of your research or of your clinic, and you can if you recall, can you repeat what you said?
Sure. Yeah. So my lab focuses on trying to better understand how the cerebral blood vessels, or the blood vessels of the brain, respond to head trauma.
How they respond.
Right. So what happens to them? What do they experience? What kinds of changes occur which are directly related to an injury? So for example, in a head injury, if it's severe enough, it's common for a blood vessel to rupture and bleed. So there are forces that must achieve a certain level, basically, in order to cause that blood vessel to be stretched enough, for example, that it would tear and then bleed. But even blood vessels that aren't stretched far enough that they're bleeding, their properties change. That's something that my lab is finding in our experiments. The body will hopefully eventually heal any changes that occur, but we are currently studying some of those kinds of effects.
It's my understanding that one of the calculations that you made or phrases used was during the trial and so forth was G-force. Is that right?
Well, I would never say G-force, because a G is a measure of acceleration, but it's closely related to the concept of force, because force equals mass times acceleration. So there are a lot of people who use that term G-force, but in my view, it is not an accurate use. It's not a word that exists in mechanics.
Okay.
But I'm
What
kind of,
word-
a little anal about that.
Well, that's fair enough. What word or phrase should we use?
Well, if you're talking about accelerations, then one would say accelerations. And if you're going to talk about a specific level of acceleration, then you could use the units of Gs. So say 50 Gs or something like that would be 50 Gs of acceleration.
Okay, so number of G's of acceleration, perhaps.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Again, apologies for, not having the transcript, and as you know, I wasn't there. So I do want to ask you just a couple of things, because this will relate to, the question, I think, of probably of relevance and so forth. I don't, it would be silly for me to dispute your qualifications. Okay. There was a height, or I believe, from which you assumed or calculated, you can tell me which, that according to your theory, the baby was dropped from a given height. What was that? What was the height?
So in my calculations that I did for this trial, I used a height of 26 inches. To be clear, I don't know what happened in this case, right? But that 26 inches is actually the height of the armpits, basically, of a 50th percentile 2 to 3.5-year-old based on the literature. So there was I guess a claim or a thought that, since, as I understand it, nobody actually viewed what happened, there's the potential that a 3-year-old picked up the infant and dropped the infant. And so I then looked at the literature that's been reported for typical heights, again, of the armpit of a 2 to 3.5-year-old child, and that's what 26 inches is.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. So what, or did you determine or estimate was the number of G's of acceleration at the point of the baby's impact, head to floor?
Yeah, so for a drop of 26 inches, where the head, I guess its velocity was not changed in any way on the way down, so a simple drop, and I don't know if that's what happened, but again, these calculations assume a simple drop. The accelerations associated with that drop range from 64 to 86 Gs.
Okay. Now, you said you said several months, no, I'm sorry, moments ago, that that you had looked at some of the medical records in the case. Do you happen to recall which records?
I don't have, I don't think I'd be able to tell you exactly which records. I was supplied with PDFs that I have titles of, and they all say things like rec space med space EPCH space 020323, which was probably a date, I'm guessing. But I don't know, for example, what hospital those were from, but I do know that they were obtained at the time when the child was just presenting. So these were acute, the records that I reviewed were associated with the acute analysis of the child.
Okay. Do you recall the names of any of the doctors or nurses whose reports you read?
I don't recall, but I'm looking at my notes right here, and I can see names like Dr. Gevorkian and Dr. Murthy, Dr. Radenovich.
And as you testified, and in fact, you actually kind of made a point of it that that you're not a medical doctor, right?
Correct.
And so we don't have to go through all the specialities, but you have trauma surgeons, you have radiologists, you have pediatricians, you have ophthalmologists, and so forth. In this case, you're not any of those. You're not any of those professions, correct?
That's right.
Okay. Now, does your theory um of if I may call it the drop or the dropping of the baby from approximately 26 inches. Uh, is that theory in opposition to the is that theory in opposition to the conclusions and of the medical doctors, or I mean, in other words, is it in either or is this, or are you just saying that this could be one other possibility?
Well, so to be clear, first of all, I don't have a theory. I actually have no opinion about what happened in this case, but it was suggested through the investigation that the child may have been dropped by a toddler. And my analysis shows that the head accelerations could have been high enough to cause injury, but I have no opinion that that is how the injuries were produced. I don't know
Okay.
that, and my analysis does not preclude the injuries being produced in some other way.
Okay. Right. Um, if you give me half a sec, I want to check a couple things here and before I proceed, okay?
Sure.
mm, okay, I was looking for something that I was looking for something that I can't find. Um, so again, getting to is I'm gonna go back to how you described your research, your team. Um, you see if I can if I can get it because I thought it was well put. Um, uh, cerebral uh, cerebral blood. You're gonna have to correct me. Cerebral, because there's a word I'm missing. Blood vessels, cerebral blood vessels, and how they respond to head trauma. Is that
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, and you mentioned, well, okay, I think we may have covered this, but maybe not because these, I'm looking at once again at some of the titles of your works. Are are you saying that most of these works, notwithstanding that some of their titles don't sound like it, are in fact dealing with the idea of how the cerebral blood vessels respond to head trauma?
Yes.
Okay. I'm getting low system resources. I'm sorry. We had trouble with, actually, most of us didn't have a computer this morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we don't have, you're coming
Okay,
in, no
yeah,
problem.
I'm getting a sign that there's a low system or something. I beg your
Oh,
pardon, Judge.
okay.
But I won't be long, so it'll be okay. Now, the, I, I understand, I guess we talk now about something that maybe is called abuse of the head of babies, or I'm not sure if that's the right term, but these cases used to be called shaken baby, which I'll be happy to give that phrase up once I know the other one better. But of these kinds of cases where children have these symptoms of cerebrally, possibly in the eye, the neck, and where there is suspicion that the baby has been shaken rather violently for a baby. Of those types of cases, how often have you testified?
Judge, I'm gonna object to relevance at this point.
Overruled.
Well, I've testified in over 60 cases through the course of my career, and they've all involved situations where a child has suffered a head injury.
Okay. Okay, how many of those have been civil actions?
I don't know off the top of my head. I would say most of them have been criminal cases.
Okay, so have most of them been where there is an accused uh, being tried for what formerly was known as shaken baby syndrome?
Or I think the phrase you're looking for may be non-accidental trauma. So the cases have all involved scenarios where there's concern for abuse and a question of whether an alternative scenario could potentially also cause the injuries.
So how often have you testified for the prosecution or the government?
I have only been retained by the government once, and they did not have me testify. Aside from that, I haven't ever been contacted by a prosecutor with interest in biomechanics testimony.
And have you, or how often have you not been qualified by a court to speak on, or to testify rather, on these issues in 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 non-accidental trauma? Is that the word you used?
Sure, yep. I think, yeah, that's whether it's non-accidental trauma or AHT could also be used, abusive head trauma. I think that's also common.
I think that was the correct phrase that I was thinking of.
Got it. Well, to answer your question, this case, the Rodriguez case, when I came to El Paso earlier this year, was the second time where I've not been allowed to testify. The other time was earlier this year, actually, in a case in Wisconsin, which is currently on appeal. But other than those, I've always been qualified as an expert and allowed to testify.
Is there any, I'm moving back a little bit to the field in general, because I thought, and I thought you, it may be the way I thought the question was phrased on direct. So I'm just going to ask you, and you can let me know if I'm right or wrong here, that you did testify on direct that there is some controversy in the academic community about this kind of an approach to the regarding the impact response And this was just before you said you thought that your testimony would be helpful. And so I guess my question is, are there within the academic world, are there critics or of your method?
Heck, are you,
Okay, was I not clear?
I know, I think I heard it. I
you
just
know,
wasn't sure that you were done with your question. Can I
Yeah,
answer?
a lot of, I mean, there's often back and forth in academics, so I just wanted to find out about that.
Yeah, sure. So to be clear, I think your assertion that I said there was some controversy, I don't believe I testified to that effect. I think I was asked whether or not other engineers would find my methods reliable, and my answer was I believed they would. There are physicians who would prefer that biomechanics not be considered. But I have not met any engineers who have disputed the use of biomechanics and its value.
So some negativity or criticism from some physicians, not from engineers.
Right.
Okay, I mean, I'm relying on your testimony. That's accurate?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you could find an engineer here or there who may have different viewpoints, but I'm speaking about the general consensus in the field.
Okay. And just to go back, so I'm sure. You mentioned 60 cases that you had testified in approximately.
Right.
And there was certainly the indication that quite a few of those were the abuse of the head of a baby, or the non-accidental trauma, and so I just want to, if can you put any kind of number on that, of those that withdraw the question, Your Honor.
All right.
What I'd like to know is how many of the cases that you testified on would you say were basically the same scenario as the Rodriguez case here in El Paso County?
So all of the cases involved trauma to the head. The question was, in all of the cases, whether or not that trauma was caused by abuse, or whether or not an alternative accidental explanation could have would also be a reasonable conclusion. They all have their own variables, of course, but all of them have involved those questions.
Okay. And again, this really does go to kind of the big question for me. So I will ask this in terms of accusations of, if I can go back to the old phrase, shaking a baby, and that causing all these injuries. How many of the cases that you worked on were those kinds of accusations? By which I mean worked on, I meant testified to.
So, how many of them were specific to shaking, the shaking mechanism? Is that what you're asking?
The accusation of either, well, okay, actually, this is an interesting question to ask you, and I'm going to finish up here pretty quick, but so in the Rodriguez case here, it seemed that there was, the typical view that the baby was badly manipulated, was shaken, was ill-treated in some way, versus the idea that it was a simple drop or accident. Okay, that's what I'm sort of talking about, like those two possibilities. How often or how many of the 60 times you testified was were those the issues? Like, how did this happen? Was it shaken? Was it shaken baby, or was the baby dropped inadvertently? Or
Yeah, all of the cases I've testified in have involved questions like that.
okay, and by all we mean close to 60. Is that correct?
More than 60, I believe, but
Okay.
somewhere a little more than 60, yes.
Okay. All right. I'm going to look over something pretty quick, and then I may be finished, Doctor.
Okay.
Okay. I think you already said this, but just to be clear, you don't say that that Dr. Ross or Dr. Murphy is wrong in their conclusions,
I'm going
correct?
to object to relevance, Judge.
I'll overrule it.
Like you can ask that. I mean, answer that, sir.
Yeah, so I guess I would have to specifically hear their opinions, but if the opinion is that the only way these injuries could have been caused is by abuse, then I would disagree with that conclusion.
So what you're going to testify to is that either either cause is possible.
That's right.
Okay. And so if I were to ask you, which, hopefully I get to ask you this at this hearing, I might not be able to get to ask you this at trial, I don't know, but based on your experience, which sounds pretty extensive here, in dealing with these cases, what what are the probabilities that your sort of, if I may say, kind of empirical alternative, or if you don't like that word, use something else, is the answer? How likely is it that that is what happened?
Judge, I'm going to object at this point to relevance and speculation.
Well, I meant based on, I beg your pardon, counsel, I think I interrupted you.
Based on speculation, Judge, he indicated probabilities. So
No,
I'm going to object.
I'm gonna sustain.
Okay, Judge, I'm not trying to get in through the back door. You may sustain this one. I think it's a different question. Sir, are you gonna tell the jury, or are you suggesting here that 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 the possibility of a drop, which you and others have shown presumably to be by all means possible, in these cases, are you going to tell the jury that is as likely as the opinion of all the doctors who saw the baby and treated the baby?
So to determine likelihood, we'd actually have to know what happened. I guess, if you let me continue on this for a second, certainly the scientific literature shows that it is uncommon for a child to suffer an injury as serious as this from a short fall, such as that described here. There are, however, cases that have been concluded to have been accidental, where the same types of injuries have resulted. In some cases, those have involved videotaped scenarios, where almost certainly there would have been a child abuse investigation if there had not been a video to actually demonstrate what happened. So we know that it's uncommon, and thank goodness that it is, because kids fall all the time. But biomechanics helps us understand that if a child falls in such a way that their head is unprotected, that the accelerations can actually be high enough to result in these kinds of injuries.
And could the fall onto the head could that have been based on the G acceleration numbers? Could that have been strong enough to cause the injuries to the eye of the baby?
So there aren't injury thresholds specific to retinal hemorrhage, because that's not something that engineers are generally interested in, understanding whether or not, for example, in an automobile or a fall off a bicycle or something is going to cause retinal hemorrhage. But there have been cases, like I referred to a moment ago in my answer, where retinal hemorrhages have been found in kids that are known to have fallen from short falls. So the G's, the accelerations that I've calculated, don't have a direct correlation with causation of retinal hemorrhage.
And do you know of any cases where the cause of the cerebral damage was a drop from approximately 26 inches, where there was broken rib?
I don't know of any cases where there was also a broken rib. But I don't generally pay attention to broken ribs, so I can't tell you whether or not that's an accurate reflection of the literature, because I'm a head injury expert.
Okay. But you are aware that occurred in this case, right?
If I consult my notes, I remember something about a rib. I'm not sure that it was an acute injury. I think somebody, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a rib injury identified that appeared to be old. So there's a healing rib fracture, and it was concluded in the medical record that that did not occur at the same time as the other injuries that were identified. That's what my notes say, at least.
Okay. Thank you. Pass the witness.
Your Honor, may I ask a couple of follow-up questions?
Sure.
Thank you, Your Honor. So just to be clear, doctor, in this particular case, you used a height of 26 inches, and that's more or less based on the height of an average 3-year-old, correct?
That's right.
And
Not the height of an average 3-year-old, but the height of an average 3-year-old's armpits.
to the floor,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
a standing height up to the armpits.
Okay, and basically this particular scenario was just based on what you read as a possible mechanism of injury in this case, based on what you read in this case. Is that right?
That's correct. The record suggested that the parents did not know what happened, but they concluded when the father went back into the room and the child was found on the ground and the 3-year-old was standing over the child, the parents suspected that the older child had picked up the younger child while they were in the car seat and had dropped them.
And when you stated earlier that you had no opinion as to how it was produced, is that because you didn't actually witness what occurred, right? I mean, that's obvious. Is that fair to say?
That's right.
Okay,
and I would add to that I don't see evidence otherwise one way or the other.
okay. Now, you came up with, based on the methodology that we had discussed earlier with the calculation of 64 to 86 G's, right, which is the acceleration
Right?
of the head. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And with those numbers, there can be a skull fracture and brain injury, correct?
Yes.
And that would be purely accidental. If that theory were correct, that would be an accident.
Well, I'm not sure what you're asking me there. I mean, if somebody were to produce those same accelerations intentionally, they could clearly also cause the injuries.
Right, but with the scenario that you had reviewed in this particular case of the possibility of a child picking up this baby and dropping it, then that would obviously be accidental versus non-accidental, correct?
Right. I mean, the analysis shows that scenario is a plausible scenario.
I know that the prosecutor had asked you in the question, you said that you're not a pediatrician or an ophthalmologist or a radiologist. But are they trained in mechanics and in biomechanics the way you are?
Physicians don't receive training generally unless they seek it out on their own. They're not trained in mechanics.
And so just to review, it's fair to say that short falls can produce both skull fracture and brain injury.
Yes.
Okay. And prosecutor had mentioned shaking as an injury mechanism. Have any actual tests that you are aware of, doctor, ever investigating this theory of shaking ever been conducted on a living child?
They have not.
Have experiments using models of infants ever been done with respect to shaking as an injury mechanism?
They have.
And what do these experiments tell us?
Well, so the experiments are quite useful in that they tell us what the accelerations are that can be generated by a human shaking an infant. Go ahead.
Can a person actually shake a child severely enough to produce subdural hemorrhaging?
Currently unknown.
Okay. What if there's no neck injury?
also currently unknown, but certainly there have been experiments conducted on neck tissue from infants that have died. So on cadaveric tissue that's been properly preserved. And those experiments show that neck ligaments, for example, rupture at force levels that are similar to those that would be present in violent shaking. So those experiments or those analyses suggest that if a child were violently shaking, that there's a good chance there could be ligament rupture in the neck. But again, there's no guarantee that that would be true. But
In this case, okay, in this case, Doctor, you indicated that you reviewed several medical records. Do you recall seeing any type of neck injury in this particular case?
I don't.
And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you testified that short distance falls have been shown to produce accelerations. Is that correct?
Sure.
Your Honor, may I have a moment to consult via the chat with my co-counsel?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, I'm going to go ahead and pass this witness.
Thank you.
Oh.
Mr. McCarthy?
Thank you, Your Honor. You answered a number of questions here as in terms of the kinds of injuries that could be sustained from shaking as currently unknown. And correct me if I'm wrong, but was the first of those questions, or one of the early questions, was that the question of whether the shaking could cause a cerebral hemorrhage?
Yeah, I think she specifically asked me about subdural hematoma, but that is a cerebral hemorrhage.
Great, thank you. And you answered currently unknown.
That's right.
Now, doctor, is that a fact or your opinion?
It's a fact.
Okay. Does if you know, would most physicians, or would most pediatricians, radiologists agree with you that it's currently unknown?
So most physicians, as I understand it, during medical school are trained that shaking can cause subdural hematoma, but there is not scientific evidence that that is true.
But the medical doctors on whom we rely in the vast majority think that it does.
Well, so again, I haven't surveyed them. I can't tell you what kind of majority there might be and who might have what opinions. There are certainly some that recognize that what they're taught in medical school about that issue is controversial, but there are others who just accept what they've been taught.
Could what you were taught in engineering school and mechanical engineering school, biomechanics, be equally controversial?
No, nothing that I've testified to here with respect to mechanical engineering is, I mean, I've not provided positive or negative opinions one way or the other about something that is currently unknown. For example, I just gave the opinion, or I just gave the answer to the question that is currently unknown whether shaking can cause subdural hematoma.
But you are saying that what you know as a mechanical engineer is fact, and what the physicians know as physicians is speculation.
So the point is that on this particular topic, what they're being taught has not been demonstrated in the scientific literature. So that shaking can cause subdural hematoma, if it's taught in medical school, is still speculative because it has not been demonstrated in the scientific literature.
And you're saying that in the mechanical engineering literature, it has been proven with great sufficiency, let's say, because I don't need absolute, that that a drop from 26 inches can in fact cause the subdural hematoma.
So that conclusion comes from observations that it has actually happened. And I'm giving you I'm giving you an opinion here that mechanical engineering principles, when applied to this problem, support that observation.
Okay. And likewise, at the very least, the opinion of most physicians comes from observation, does it not?
I really couldn't tell you. If their opinions come from observations, then they're extremely limited. That's kind of the whole point of science and publication of scientific findings.
Okay. And of course, physicians publish papers with their scientific findings.
Some do.
You do not consider medicine to be an empirical science?
I did not say that.
Thank you. Oh, I have one more question. I'm sorry, Your Honor. May I?
Yes.
Thank you. It's an important one that I need to ask you. Can you tell the court, I know you said that you read some of the medical reports. Can you tell the court the facts as you remember them, each of the facts that you relied upon before you drew your own you drew the conclusion of the possibility of the drop?
Judge, and I'm gonna object if based on relevance. I mean, he's and also asked and answered. He's indicated he's reviewed the
Well,
report, and there
I'm
are a
sorry.
lot of facts in this case. So to summarize would limit him in the future on cross-examination without him being able to actually look at everything again carefully. Medical records are voluminous in this case, Judge.
Of course there are, Judge. I'm sure he'll look at more if we go forward. Apologize for making it sound like I wanted him to cite every fact in the case. I wanted to know, based on what he knows right now, which facts he relied upon informing his alternative. And I think that the relevance is clear from the case that I sent over to counsel and yourself, that that the facts considered are in fact an integral part of making the decision about the whether the about whether the witness can testify as an expert. And I think that's on page 133 of the Vela case.
Oh, overrule the objection. You may answer the question, Dr. Monson.
Okay. Are you interested in what I got from the medical records or from the whole record?
Start with the medical records, if you will, and of course, once you do that, I'll ask you about the other facts too.
Okay. So from the medical records, I learned that there was a subdural hematoma, which was characterized as small, that there was a right parietal skull fracture, and that there was left-sided retinal hemorrhage, that the child was 5 weeks old, had a height of 54 centimeters. I actually didn't use that. A weight of 4.1 kilograms. I think that essentially summarizes the facts that I utilized from the medical record.
Thank you. And if you care to, would you like to add other facts that you took into account?
Yeah, so the statement of the defendant certainly is not a fact. At least I don't know if it's a fact. It's his statement. But that certainly played a role in my analysis. Well, yeah, I mean, it influenced the scenario that I evaluated, right? The one fact that was given is that the floor was covered with carpet. It was a tile floor that was covered with a shag carpet. The toddler that picked up the child was 3 years old. The bouncy seat, there were some photos and measurements made of the bouncy seat that the child was left in when Mr. Rodriguez left the room. So the measurements of that seat were taken. I did not really use them, but they were noted. Yeah, I think that summarizes the information that I used from the record.
Okay. And Doctor, if you know to date, how much have you billed on this case?
Judge, I'm going to object to relevance for this 702 hearing. I mean, if I could see.
Yeah, no, that's the thing, for the purposes of this hearing.
Oh, I didn't hear you, Judge.
I'm sustaining for the purposes of this hearing.
Yes, ma'am.
It's not that you can't ask the question, but it's not really relevant to whether or not it meets qualifications of relevancy and reliability, et cetera, for an expert.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
Judge, I just have a follow-up question. Dr. Munson, are you familiar with data that shows that a 1-foot drop onto concrete produces acceleration similar to shaking in infants?
Yes.
And are you also, strike that. I don't have any further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. McCarthy?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
And all right. So nothing further from
Oh.
state or the defense, is that correct?
Yeah, I meant no more questions of this witness. Thank you.
All right, all right,
Thank you, Mr. Munson.
you're welcome. And what is the relief that you're requesting, Ms. Pages?
Your Honor, we are basically asking this court to allow Dr. Munson to testify in this case. I believe based on his testimony, we have shown that he is qualified in his field of expertise. We have shown that the methodology and the techniques used are reliable. There have been publications made. These theories have been studied and are constantly studied for years by students, and he's taught these types of theories. And they are certainly relevant, Judge, especially in this type of case that can show that possible theory could have taken place and caused these types of injuries. And we do believe that his testimony would be helpful to a jury in hearing this case and in deciding what happened. And I don't know, Judge, if I could just check the chat. I apologize. I know I have to be going back and forth, but if I can see if co-counsel has anything else, Judge.
Sure.
Judge, and basically that the scientific theory is valid in this case and was applied to this case and is proper.
Any response, Mr. McCarthy?
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes. Clearly, there's no question of qualifications and so forth, but as court well knows, there's a lot more at stake than qualifications. There's obviously, I mean, relevance, reliability, helpfulness to the jury. Of course, those are like the big four, right? And then the case I sent you talks about what they call fit, like how well does it fit into the case itself. And I'm troubled. Well, I'm more than troubled. I mean, I will object to this testimony in the sense that although I don't have personal knowledge, this was a long trial. My colleagues on the other side would know exactly, but I think before the mistrial, it was like 8 days or more, 9 days or something that this trial went on. There were lots and lots of facts. There were at least 6 physicians plus a nurse practitioner or more who had reports and facts. And Your Honor just heard from the engineer, the mechanical engineer, that he only took account of a very few of those medical facts in reaching his alternative. So I think that goes against what is being said here in terms of, I think if I have the actual quote, yeah, so it says, I mean, this is just one piece of the Vela case, but it's on page 133, the very top. We discussed the fit requirement in Jordan v. State and explained that the issue under the reliability and relevance conditions is, quote, whether the expert's testimony took into account enough of the pertinent facts to be of assistance to the trier of fact at issue. And then, of course, it goes on and talks about various aspects of this idea of fit, meaning it's not enough, which certainly Mr. Monson is a expert mechanical engineer without question. There's There's also language here, and as I say, this is a clean opinion. It's been cited many times and never been questioned. They also talk about how experience alone, no matter how much, is not enough to qualify. I mean, that is in this opinion practically verbatim. But the other point, Your Honor, that I think makes this testimony highly problematic at the least, and perhaps disqualifying, is this notion that physicians don't do empirical research, that they don't know what they're talking about, but the mechanical engineer does. And that this idea of shaken baby is effectively speculation, some kind of I don't know, antiquated idea that medical doctors learn in school. You know, this is what has been the position of the physicians of the medical community on these issues has been by far and away the dominant, the overriding. It's what we look to. It's what we naturally look to. And so I found that position is sort of, I don't want to exaggerate it, but his dismissal is not an exaggeration to say his dismissal of the scientific rigor of the physicians, to me, is a radical. Telephone. I'm sorry. Brand new office. Okay. I just think that's I find that to be, I find that to be extreme. I think that does it. Thank you for your time, Your Honor.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
You're muted, Judge.
Thank you. On the second issue, this is what I'm thinking, and it's I did not understand Dr. Munson's testimony to say that there is no empirical evidence regards to the medical that it was purely speculation. What I understood him to say is there's no empirical evidence in the area of expertise of engineers to support that this idea of shaken baby produces these injuries. I can't, and y'all can question him, I can't imagine that Dr. Munson, who is not a doctor and is not medically trained, has surveyed all of the medical literature that supports a physician coming to that conclusion. I think what you've got are two different fields of expertise who have different research basis and make their corresponding conclusions. So I did not understand, I don't know if that helps you, Ms. Pages, but I did not understand Dr. Munson saying, in his view, it's speculation because there's nothing in the engineering field that would support that conclusion. But I can't imagine that he can speak to the medical field and their scientific rigor and their scientific research that supports them coming to that conclusion. Does that make sense?
Yes, Judge, and
that's
also,
what I understood. So when Mr. McCarthy, if that's one of his bases, I didn't understand it the way he does. And I think that's going to be part of the trial. Is Mr. McCarthy is going to have his medical experts look at how and why they draw that conclusion in their field of expertise, and then y'all are going to do the same thing with Dr. Munson and why why he in his field draws that expertise. I mean, it really is, if as Dr. Munson presents, it sounds like these two different fields have drawn different conclusions. Does that make sense?
Yes, Judge.
So, so that's, yeah, I mean, I think that's an issue, for y'all, at a jury trial with the experts. It does not, affect my decision in terms of, reliability, and the qualifications. I think, and the first, so I'm just trying to understand the argument, Mr. McCarthy. I think your first essentially objection to this witness being qualified as an expert is more to do with relevance, in that he, in your view, has not examined the whole record in order to come to a conclusion of its non-accidental versus, or abusive head trauma versus an accidental cause. And so, and again, I think that goes to the issue. I mean, that's going to be the core issue for everyone at the jury trial. So, I mean, I think there's a point at which an expert has only reviewed a limited part of the record, could find themselves not qualified on the basis of relevance because they don't have enough information of the case to form an opinion that is helpful to the jury. I think that could happen. I think it's but at this time, I mean, if we said hypothetically to Dr. Munson, he's done all of this based on what's in the medical records and what he's found in the defendant's statement or in the police records. But let's say 2 weeks before trial, somebody comes up with a video that conclusively proves it one way or the other. Does that mean he's wrong in terms of his calculations? And I think the answer to that is no. We've got a black box, and he's proposed one possible cause or scenario for the results in that black box. So I do think he has, his opinion does rely on enough of the record to allow him to be relevant to the jury and the ultimate question that they have to decide. And so for that reason, I am going to qualify him as an expert and allow him to testify at trial. I think those are the questions. I mean, y'all all know this. You're all very experienced practice attorneys. So this is all going to be part of your cross-examinations of each other's experts. And ultimately it'll go to the jury to make that finding as to whether or not this baby, in this case, suffered abusive head trauma or accidental head trauma, depending on the all of the evidence that's going to be adduced at trial. I mean, we could all take an expert and say, okay, let's add in this factor. How's that going to affect things? I mean, you know what I mean? You guys have been doing this long enough, but I do think y'all have minimally met the requirement to allow Dr. Munson to testify, and that's my ruling. All right, anything further?
Yes, Judge. I don't know if either back. There's two questions that I have. It has to do with really discovery, not with Dr. Munson. So Dr. Munson can be excused if the court choose to do so.
Yes, Dr. Munson, you are excused. I'm sure you have better things to do than listen to us opine all day.
Thank you.
Thank you for your cooperation.
The first thing is, and I wasn't really sure or clear, but the prosecutor mentioned transcript. I don't know if he has them or doesn't. We don't have them. Okay, so you don't have them. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't have them either. I don't know that anybody requested them, and y'all are in charge of that. If you want to, get them.
The second one, Judge, has to do with during the previous trial, Dr. Rios Tovas testified via Zoom. During that testimony, the prosecution used its computer to broadcast and record that testimony. During the trial, we had requested a copy. A copy was supposed to be given to us, a copy of that video testimony that is on the prosecution's computer. We have not received that copy. And I know Mr. McCarthy may not know about it, but that copy is on their computer, and I would like to have a copy of that, please.
Okay, so let's back up. So what you're telling me is that there was a witness at trial for a certain period of time, was video recorded by the prosecutor as he or she was testifying during the trial. Is that correct?
Judge. Yes.
And do you know what date, what time, what witness?
Yes, it was Dr. Rios Tovas who testified. Is the only witness who testified via Zoom. He's the first. Yes.
Okay. So I don't remember. I don't have my list of witnesses. Mr. McCarthy, is that one of your experts that you're going to be calling?
Yes, ma'am, and he will be called. My understanding from discussions with my paralegal, is that that was actually done on the court's computer, not ours. Now, I will, of course, make sure that that's accurate. And if we have anything, we will give it to Mr. Shelley, of course. And
okay, I mean, that's all you can do. I mean, obviously, in lieu of that, you have the transcript. I mean, that's the only other thing.
We have to get that. I think both sides need to get it. It's just, yeah.
Good luck in getting that before January 6th.
Yeah.
And I believe, because I remember specifically because there was actually technical issues during the Zoom testimony. Mr. Admir's computer was not connected to a power source, so he ended up crashing because of memory. And that's how we realized it was the state's computer that was used for that testimony, Judge.
Okay, so in it being the state's computer, to which prosecutor do you understand that computer was in possession of at the time?
It was Mr. Admur, Admur, I believe. That was videotaped on that computer, which was from the district attorney's office.
Well,
And Judge, if I may clarify, it's my understanding that it was through their Zoom account that they may have recorded the session. I don't know if it was automatically recorded to the computer or to the account, but I do remember them mentioning that it was going to be recorded.
All right. Do y'all have a date? You recall a date?
I don't have it right in front of me, but I can look for it, Judge, and we
I
can
think
hope. Right.
okay, so you're talking about Dr. Rios Tovar, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well,
Only.
Okay. That's plenty. I don't need necessarily dates, probably. If I do, I'll let you know. I'm happy to give you something that we have, Mr. Shelley. I have heard about this, and my paralegal, whom I trust very much, has told me that it was done by the court. I will look. I of course am going to look into it, and if it turns out we've got it, you'll get it lickety split. You know that.
Yeah, of course. And I don't think you were aware of it, so that's why I'm mentioning it. Because we were going to ask, and we talked about it with Mr. Adnur when he was at the office at the time of the trial, but after everything that happened, I just didn't want it to fall through the crack. And I appreciate your help on that.
Right. And so, yeah, if you could use, if you could diligently make those kinds of inquiries, and perhaps today's Monday, I'm going to say by Friday, if Mr. McCarthy,
Yes, ma'am.
by way of email, if y'all want to CC me on it, I mean, I'm happy to be part of it, but I don't know that you necessarily need me with that. But at least ensure that the state doesn't have control of that particular video recording that the defense is looking for. So that's what we would, I think that would be helpful. And I understand, Mr. Shelley, I know you had said last week that you were trying to finish up a case on appeal, but that you were hopeful that you could do the motion for double jeopardy. Are you still on track to get that?
Yes, I'm still on track to have done that, to have it done this week, just. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And as soon as you do, I mean, obviously send that to me, well, circulate it to everybody. I mean, y'all know, y'all are all responsible professional attorneys, that if you send me anything, you CC everybody else.
What I do, Judge, is I will email it to each person here individually, because I know that it takes a little bit of time for the system to accept, and so you'll have it as soon as the moment I file it. I will CC it personally to everyone here.
All right. Okay. Is there anything further? I know we're set. I don't think we've gotten the Zoom set up with that, but I will follow up with Robert.
Oh, I'm sorry, Judge.
No problem.
My my lack of organization. December 6 and 9, correct? On those?
I don't have it in front of me.
No problem. I can
I
check.
don't think it's hold on. Let me get my calendar. I don't think it's December 6th.
I thought it was December the 5th.
Is it? Hold
That's
on.
the date I have.
Let me go check my calendar. All right, I have December the 5th, 9 a.m. is the double jeopardy motion. And then at 1:30 p.m., 5 on December 5th will be the experts. And then Friday, it's 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. all day for the experts. And this is the other thing I was thinking about. If for some reason we cannot get to an expert, or an expert cannot appear, then we'll have to then take time. I prefer to get as many of the experts done. I mean, obviously I'd like to get all of them done, right? But what I want and what I get are, like I say, sometimes those are two different things. So if need be, we will just have to take that up at trial. I think that's, it would be difficult with the number of experts that y'all are calling to try to do all of them as we get to them during the trial. I think that would be kind of disruptive. But if we have maybe one straggler is at the most, we can do that. I prefer, obviously, again, for us to get through them. The 5th, what did that tell you? Sorry. Let me look at it. The 5th.
1:30.
The 5th and the 6th, yes. So we have that Thursday afternoon and all day Friday.
Thank you, Judge. Yes, I think we will. I need to confirm, but I believe we will have an expert available on the 5th for sure. 5th and 6th.
And so y'all might want to, if I were y'all, coordinate with each other, because I'd hate for you to, everybody say, oh, I've got everybody ready on the Thursday afternoon, because we're not going to get through all of these experts Thursday afternoon. If today is any guide, I mean, probably 2 experts on Thursday and then the balance on Friday. So that's obviously going to require coordination with y'all, because you don't want to get 4 of them lined up for Thursday afternoon. We're not going to be able to get through them.
Yeah, I will reach out to Mr. McCarthy and see how we can manage Thursday and Friday, and who's available at what time, and then
Yeah.
we'll send a proposed lineup, if I may say that.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Look, I've been in everybody's shoes, so whatever's easiest. You don't have to give me a memo. An email is good. It's fine. This is what we've agreed to. That's fine. Just so I have some idea of how we're going forward and addressing that, and then we'll do that. But other than that, I think that should conclude everything, unless somebody else has another matter.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Judge.
You're very welcome. Mr. McCarthy, anything else?
Thank you, Judge.
Okay.
May we be excused.
Yes, everybody.
Thank
Oh,
you.
Hi, Judge.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Talk to y'all later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.